Hello, welcome back. I'm very happy to be here, even though the weather's a bit colder. But I thought that it would be good to start, as I have done the last few episodes, with a brief update on my own fat loss phase for those of you that are interested in that. So I mentioned last week how I had experienced a spike in weight, how I was feeling hormonal. I was just waiting for that period to start, and how I expected the weight then to come back down. And I know that when you're feeling hormonal, it can be really hard to trust the process, which is why I mentioned about it being so good to keep focusing on the changes that you know are making you feel better. Anyway, I did ride it out, and over the weekend, my period started, and then I had to do my measurements. Well, I didn't have to, but I was doing my 4-week measurements on Monday. So my weight had then come back down again to less than it had been when it spiked up initially. So it was at a new lowest for this phase. And the other interesting thing is that my waist measurement had come down by nearly 2 inches since I started. Now, I took some photos and you might see a slight difference there, but nothing drastic. And I wouldn't expect to at the 4-week mark. It's kind of hard, especially on yourself, to see that change. But the weight is down and there's inches off the waist. So things are heading in the right direction. But the main thing is that you wouldn't believe the difference in how I felt once that period started. It felt like quite a difficult build up this time. And that's something I have noticed as I'm getting a little bit older, is that bit of time before my cycle does seem to be harder. Anyway, the weight spiked, but it did, as expected, come back down. So if you are somebody that's feeling like it's not working because the scales aren't doing what you want them to do, then it still might be working. It's just giving it time. If you made changes and you know that what you're doing is consistently better than what you've been doing in the past when you were maintaining a heavier weight, then it will be happening. So keep going. So full transparency, I actually started recording this podcast yesterday, but unfortunately, as I'd finished the introduction, had just started the main element of the podcast, my husband came in with our cat, who really wasn't very well at all. And unfortunately, it didn't go very well for him yesterday. And I'm not going to talk about it much because it makes me very sad, because he was a brilliant, brilliant cat, best cat ever. But I did want to continue with today's episode because I really wanted to talk to you about strength training, but slightly differently than we have in the past, because I specifically want to get into the basics of it. You might be someone who used to exercise quite a lot. Maybe you've lost your way with it and it feels like this constant battle to try and get back to it. Or you might be someone who's fairly new to strength training and you've not ever really felt that confident with it. Maybe you find the language quite confusing, or you're just not quite sure if you're doing it right. And then there's someone who is doing it, but who easily loses motivation and worries about whether what they're doing is actually working. So wherever you are, this is the episode for you, because we so often hear about why we should strength train, specifically in midlife. It's everywhere, and rightly so. But I think what's often missing is the how. What does a session actually look like? What does all the language mean that we hear? Do you actually really need to lift heavy? And what's a normal level of ache after a session? And those are the types of things that I really want to cover with you today. But I am going to briefly start by covering the why, because I think it would be remiss of me, because it is something that I think we should all be aware of and know. But we're then going to spend most of our time looking at the practical stuff. And I'm going to be referencing back to episode 89 a few times, where I talk more about making exercise feel good. So that's going to be a really good one to listen to afterwards if you're someone who has struggled to enjoy strength training in the past. So when we think about why strength training is important, I think it's important to know that from our 30s, we start to lose muscle mass. It's normal, it's age-related, and it's called sarcopenia, age-related loss of muscle mass. And this increases around perimenopause. And what this can actually mean in everyday life is that it affects not only our strength, but also our balance and how we move day to day. And then because of this, our long-term independence and how we age over time. But the really, really reassuring thing with all of this is that we really can do something about it. So strength training has been shown to not only stop the decline, it can actually reverse it. So we're defying aging, which is amazing. We can still build muscle at any age. We can still get stronger. And alongside that, it also supports our bone density, which becomes increasingly important as our estrogen starts to drop. And there's actually research that shows that strength training combined with high impact weight bearing exercise can actually help preserve or even improve bone density, even without HRT. And I think that's really reassuring for those of you who are unable to take HRT, because there will be some people out there that can't. Now we can think about this idea of this future health bank, like every rep you do is a little deposit for future you. And I really do believe that. But as I've mentioned in that episode 89, I also know that this will be great when kind of logic, when I'm older, is not going to get you to get out of bed on a tired Wednesday and head to do some strength training. So what I want to say is, yes, the long stuff is important. It's a bonus, but how it makes you feel now is what is going to get you training and feeling your best. And part of this is the fact that you feel more capable, you feel stronger in everyday life. It's that sense of your body being on your side rather than working against you. And those are the things that keep you going and keep you wanting to do it. And the bonuses that long-term health is also going to be improving because of this. Now, the NHS recommends that we do 2 strength sessions a week, and that is fab. You can aim towards doing that. But I think it's important to know that we don't know how that might look. It might look different for everyone. And if you're just starting out and you're currently doing nothing, I think that this can feel like quite a daunting prospect. You might be feeling like you've got to do 2 1-hour sessions, and it can feel like a lot, especially if you're feeling like it's got to be done in the gym. You've got to go to the gym, do 2-hour training sessions. That in itself can be overwhelming for a lot of people. And I think we need to listen to that information, because if it's feeling like it's too much, the chances are that you're not going to do it, that you won't maintain doing that. So we want to really build that habit and get you started. And what I know from working with women for a long time is that even 5 to 10 minutes a day done consistency can build strength. I mean, really, really can. I've had women who have started doing no strength training, really struggled with consistency, and then only done the PJ workouts, which are 5 to 10 minutes of body weight exercises. Sometimes they add in some dumbbells over time, but they've got stronger just from doing that. I've had an example recently that I shared with you where a member who was doing PJ workouts only, and she'd been in boots, she'd squatted down to get something from that bottom shelf, and she stood back up afterwards and only then realized that she'd had her rucksack on the whole time. And she said she just sprang back up without even thinking about it. And a year ago, that would be something that she wouldn't have been able to do. And she did not get there by going and doing hour-long sessions. She really did start with this 5 to 10 minutes. And the idea of these short routines actually started years ago for me with my sister. My sister wanted to lose weight, but she wanted to lose weight because she'd had this really nasty sore back. She'd had a slip disc, and she realized that she wanted to build strength as well. But the idea of exercise filled her with dread. So we started by introducing it in this way. And she not only lost weight because she was focusing on her nutrition as well, but when she lost the weight, you could see that she'd visibly got more muscle tone just from doing those exercises. And from somebody that didn't really like exercise, she was then going, oh, I can manage a bit more. So she was getting this ripple effect from doing them as well. So what I really want to say is, please don't let the idea of what you think a workout should look like stop you from starting with what you can actually do right now. So before we go any further, I want to just quickly explain what's actually happening inside your body when you strength train. Because I think that when you understand this, a lot of other things that I'm going to mention in this podcast will make sense. When you put your muscles under load, whether that's with lifting a weight or doing a press against the floor in that press up, or just lowering yourself into a bodyweight squat, you create tiny microscopic tears in your muscle fibers, which I know can sound quite dramatic and alarming, but I promise you it's not. This is exactly what we want to happen. It's the whole point. This is how muscle is built. Because what happens next is that your body then repairs those tiny tears. And when it repairs them, it builds them back a little bit stronger than they were before. So the muscle is adapting. It's responding to the challenge that you've given it. And over time, with consistent training, that's what builds your strength. The important thing to understand here about all of it is that the actual building happens in the recovery, not in the session itself. The session is the stimulus. The recovery is where the magic happens, which is why rest days really matter, why your sleep matters, why getting enough protein matters, because you're giving your body what it needs to do that repair work. I've experienced this myself because I used to train really hard in the gym, and I'd think I was recovering well, because if I wasn't training, surely I was recovering well. But I wasn't fueling my body in the way it needed to be fueled. And honestly, the biggest difference I noticed with me then gaining some muscle was when I started eating breakfast. Now, it's not because I started eating breakfast. It was because that gave me a boost of protein at that time in the day. And it then ended up following suit. And I was snacking less on the crap things. So I did notice that things changed when I just started having enough nutrients in my diet as well. So recovery is very, very important. It's not always about just doing more training. Now, if you are listening to this with a fat loss goal in mind, I do want to talk about how strength training fits into all of this as well, because I think there's a bit of a confusion out there about what strength training actually does for fat loss. And I'd rather give you the honest picture. You'll hear people say that building muscle means you'll burn more calories at rest. And I think they're doing this to encourage you to strength train, to say, if you strength train, you'll lose fat without even trying. But I really do want to be honest here, because the actual difference in calories burned at rest from adding some muscle is fairly small. It's not nothing, but it isn't this magic metabolic switch that I think some people would like you to believe. But there is another impact that does make a difference. And it comes back to what I was saying about how strength training makes you feel. Because when you start to feel stronger, you have this change, this shift, and you just start doing more. You take the stairs without thinking about it. You feel more capable. You go for a walk because you feel like it. You're more likely to be active in all those other small ways throughout the day that you don't even clock as exercise. It's what we call NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically all the movement you do that isn't planned exercise. And NEAT actually accounts for a really significant chunk of our calories that we burn throughout the day. So when that starts to naturally rise, because you feel so much better and you feel so much more capable, that is where this real metabolic advantage comes in. And then, of course, there is the body composition piece. So someone once said to me, so I heard once it said that muscles are basically nature's Spanx. I think there is something to be said for that, because what you'll often notice when you are strength training, especially at this stage of life, is that when we find that we've put a bit more weight on around the middle and we've lost that bit of muscle, when you then start to build that muscle back, your body just starts to feel different, more held together. Your clothes fit differently. You feel stronger and more like yourself. And that feeling, I think, has this brilliant ripple effect on everything else, on how you eat, on how much you move, on how you feel about yourself in general. It's hard to quantify this, but I do think it's one of the things I see most consistently is the change in movement and how we feel about ourselves just from feeling stronger in body and mind. Before we get into more of the practical stuff, I do want to talk about some of the things that I hear a lot that put women off strength training in the first place, because I do want you to feel like you're getting the confidence to go and strength train. But if you've got these things that are stopping you in the first place, then we need to tackle those. And the first one gets talked about a lot. It's about bulking up. And I promise you, this is not going to happen. You're not going to bulk up. To build significant muscle mass, you'd need years of very specific, very heavy training. And you'd need to be eating a lot of protein consistently on top of that. It doesn't happen by accident. What you will notice is that change in body composition, which is exactly what we were just talking about. It's what you might refer to as becoming more toned. I've been strength training now consistently for over 12 years, and I do have muscle. It tends to build on my shoulders and those sorts of area, but I wouldn't say I've ever got bulky with it. I've gained weight at different times, but not so much bulky from muscle. And then we've also got this gym fear. A lot of people believe that if you want to strength train properly, then you have to go to the gym, and you don't. You don't need to go to the gym. I do like to go to the gym now, but body weight and resistance band training can take you a very, very long way, especially when you're just starting out at home. I trained at home until recently, and I have a decent setup at home. I've got decent heavy dumbbells. And I think that's the nice thing about training at home with the set of dumbbells is, to begin with, they might feel pretty heavy, but over time you might go, oh, they're not quite feeling enough right now. So then you could get yourself a kettlebell that's a little bit heavier, or a set of dumbbells that's a little bit heavier. But you absolutely don't need loads of kit in order to get started at home. In fact, most of my members will start with just bands, and that is plenty. And actually, resistance bands can be pretty challenging, I tell you. And then there's this belief that we only should lift heavy. And you probably have heard people saying this, and I have a bit of a bugbear with it. I was actually listening to a reel on Instagram yesterday, and it had Stacey Sims on a podcast talking about the fact that if we want to build stronger, more capable muscles, then we do need enough load, because just doing more and more and more reps of the same thing doesn't necessarily increase the force your muscles can produce. It often just makes you better at that movement and improves your endurance. So her point is that at some stage, we need more challenge, more tension. And that's where adding more weight and more load can come in. So I do agree with this, but there's a bit that so many people are missing when they're just saying lift heavy. Heavy is relative. If you have never strength trained before, your own body weight will feel heavy to you. A controlled squat or a push-up, or even just holding some positions with good form, this can feel like more than enough to stimulate strength gains. So the idea that it only counts if you're lifting really heavy weights or loading up a barbell just isn't true. And I do think that this messaging can put a lot of women off starting before they've even had a chance, because they think, well, if I'm not ready for this, then I don't know what to do. Perhaps because they've got sore backs or sore knees. And I don't know anyone that goes straight into the gym on the first day and picks up a barbell and does a squat with good form. Some people might be starting with seated exercises. Some people might be starting with body weight. Some might be able to do dumbbells. But the point is, we start where we are, and it doesn't need to be heavy to begin with. So yes, lifting heavier can be really useful, but you don't need to start there for it to count. And then I also hear you saying that you think you're past it. You're too old to start. It's not going to make a difference anymore. And I'm telling you that I have seen women in their 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond making incredible progress with building some muscle. In fact, I saw a woman on Instagram recently who was in her 90s when she started strength training. And they had a video of her before, and she was walking around all bent over. She started doing some strength with her daughter, and she was walking more upright, and she was walking better. And she said it was life-changing. Now, she's not there doing 1 rep maxes, but it's made her move in a better way. And that's the point. It's that we can make these changes at any time. It's never too late. Obviously, the younger you are, the easier it is, I guess. But as I mentioned earlier, you start where you are, and that might be seated, that might be body weight, that might be dumbbells, that might be machine weights in the gym. And actually, I do want to just spend a little bit more time talking about the long sessions, because I do think there's this idea that if it's not 45 minutes or an hour, it doesn't count. And even that is enough to stop you from starting in the first place. And that's not because you don't want to strength train, but because of what you think you have to do just isn't fitting into your life. In fact, I said this on my last episode, but we'll say that life got in the way of the program, the plan, but actually life is the plan. And it's the approach that's getting in the way of life. So we need to find how we can have the plan of life with these things fitting in with it. Because some weeks you're going to have loads of time and loads of energy, and you could happily do a solid 45 minutes to an hour session. But other weeks you might be more tired, you might be more busy, and the idea of doing this long workout feels completely overwhelming, especially at this stage of life. Not every day or every week is going to be the same. And the barrier to training is not always that motivation is lacking. Sometimes it's that the format isn't fitting for us right now. Sometimes it's that what you've got available that day isn't matching what you think your workout should look like. And this mismatch is often what stops you from starting. Short and consistent workouts are going to be long and very occasional every single time. If you're doing 5 to 10 focus minutes regularly, that's going to do more for your strength than an hour-long one every now and again. And actually, we've got loads of options for workouts inside the Ruth McFit app. And this is exactly the reason why, because the most optimal plan is the one that we'll actually do. So yes, sometimes you might want a follow along session where I'm guiding you through it. Sometimes you need something super quick, like the time efficient gym, a kettlebell workout, or a quick home workout with bands, or even those PJ workouts. And other times you might want this more structured approach where you're following the same session for 6 weeks. And that's what we call our current block. But the point is that we need to have an element of flexibility there. And that isn't cutting corners. That's making sure that we can stay consistent when life inevitably shows up in whatever way it's going to. Right, onto the practical stuff now, because I think it's important we cover some of the language that comes up all the time in strength training. And I remember when I was teaching, my husband used to say, I don't understand what you're talking about. I would say things like EHCP, Senko. I'm trying to think now. And actually, it wasn't even EHCP back then. But I would use these shortened terms and he'd be like, oh, you're talking teacher language. And he wouldn't know what they meant. And I felt the same about him when he was in the army and he'd have all these terms that he used as well. And I guess anything that you get into can have these bits that at the beginning you don't really understand. And that includes training and strength training. So I thought it'd be a really good idea to cover some of the language that you might come across so that you're not feeling overwhelmed or out of your depth. But I do want you to bear in mind that PTs, coaches, they never mind you asking for help or asking what something means. They normally enjoy it. So the most basic one that you're going to come across are reps and sets. A rep is one single complete movement. If you're squatting down and then going back up, that's one rep. A bicep curl would be going up and then back down. That is one rep. And then a set is a group of reps done together before you rest. So 3 sets of 10 means you do 10, rest, and then you go back and do 10 again. And then you do rest, and then you'll do 10 again for that 3 sets. You can think of sets as a bit like rounds, really. And actually, when we're talking about sets and reps, I think there is something that can really confuse people. And I'm not sure that I've ever really heard it explained properly, not on a podcast anyway. But if you see a workout and it says something like 4 times 6, that means 4 sets of 6 reps. It goes sets first and then reps. Always. So it's not 6 sets of 4. And the reason I say that is because when the sets and the reps are quite close in number, it can get quite confusing. Obviously, if you were seeing 3 times 12, you might kind of go, oh, okay, they don't want me to do 12 sets. But I just thought it would be worth bearing in mind. And then you're also going to hear the term superset. And all that means is 2 exercises paired together back to back before you rest. So rather than doing all your sets of 1 exercise and then moving on, you might do a set of squats, go into a set of press ups, and then rest. And it's a nice way of keeping things moving and making good use of your time. You might even get a tri-set or giant set as well. And actually that rest that we're talking about is often marked on your plan as well. The rest is the rest between sets. It's not because you're being lazy. It is part of the process. Your muscles are going to need that time to recover so that you can give the same effort in the next set. And for most strength work, you're going to be looking at somewhere between 60 to 90 seconds as a good guide. If you're doing heavier, you might be a bit longer than that. And if you're doing those supersets, that may well come at the end of the superset. Other terms that you might come across that might seem quite confusing in this world are things like eccentric, maybe supine. And I briefly want to cover these as well because they do sound more complicated than they actually are or probably need to be. So eccentric just refers to the lowering or the lengthening phase of a movement. So in a squat, it's the bit where you're going down. In a bicep curl, it's the bit where you're lowering the weight back down. And this is really important because the eccentric phase is where a lot of the muscle building work actually happens. It can also be why we get a little bit more sore when we've been working that phase hard, which I'm going to come back to in just a moment. And then supine just means lying on your back. So if you're doing a workout and it says supine position, it just means on your back. That's it. Right. Tempo is about how fast or slow you move through an exercise. And slowing things down, particularly on that eccentric phase that we just talked about, makes the movement significantly harder without needing any extra weight. So you often actually have to go lighter. And if you see numbers written next to an exercise like 3, 1, 2, 1, that is for the tempo. So for a squat, 3-1-2-1 would mean squatting down for 3 seconds in that lowering phase, a 1 second pause at the bottom, 2 seconds coming back up, and 1 second at the top. That's 1 rep, and it's taking you 7 seconds. And when you try 10 of those, it's going to feel pretty hard and quite different from normal. You can actually try this at home without even needing to be doing a workout. So next time you sit down in a chair, take 3 to 4 seconds to lower yourself into it, nice and controlled. And that is time and attention. That is a lowering phase doing a lot of the work. And you can thank me later for that one. And Andy, who I podcast with on the Grow Old Disgracefully podcast, he told me to go to the gym next time I was doing the leg extension and do proper time and attention training, where each rep was taking 6 seconds. I had to start with 15 reps. I had to go so much lighter, and my legs were screaming by the end. Each time I dropped the reps, I had to go heavier as well. Honestly, yeah. I was cursing his name at the time. And another term that you'll come across is progressive overload. So you're going to hear people talking about this a lot, and it can sound really complicated, like there's this special formula to it. But really, it just means you're gradually making your training a little bit harder, and that's over time, so that your muscles keep being challenged and keep getting stronger. And that's it. And it could mean adding a couple more reps, a little bit more weight, slowing down that tempo, improving your form, going from a wall press up to a worktop press up. All of those things absolutely count as progressive overload. And it's actually a really nice way to measure your progress as well. You can see what's improving over time. But those small steps are what are making you stronger. And it definitely isn't just about adding more weight all the time, because the problem with doing that is that if we're always thinking progressive overload means adding more weight, you might add weight and then your form will go. So form first always. So look to improve your form, which as a beginner, you might find that you can lift significantly heavier if you spent that time at the beginning working on that form, engaging those muscles and understanding what the movement feels like. And then you can start increasing the weight and the reps and so on. Now, there's also compound movements and isolation movements. And so a compound exercise works multiple muscle groups at once. So a squat uses your legs, it uses your glutes, it uses your core. A press up is working your chest, your shoulders, your triceps. And an isolation exercise is just focusing on one muscle, and that could be like a bicep curl. If you're training at home, a compound movement is going to give you the most return for your time, actually, even if you're training in the gym, because it can allow you to work more of your body in one go. But if you're in the gym, you've got machine weights and they are more isolation based. And I find them really useful for when I really do want to target a specific muscle. So I've got my lazy right glute at the moment. And because it's happened, because I get a bit of lower back pain in my SI joint, my body can try and protect that by making me move in a different way, which means that getting that right glute to turn on through exercises where my body can twist or can move or can use a different muscle instead can be harder. But if I go onto the abductor machine and I'm forced to stay in that place, it has to work. And so I find it useful for things like that. And when you're a beginner, if you're worried about form, these machine weights will keep you in the right sort of movement pattern. So they can be really useful for that. And I think overall, I probably just mix it up a bit. You know, if you're going to the gym, do a bit of both. If you're at home, then you're going to be doing more of those compound movements anyway. So if we're thinking about all of this information and then pulling it together to make a session, apart from those PJ workouts, which kind of are standalone things, really, we're going to be starting our session with a warm up. And the warm up might just be 5 minutes. It's going to be something super simple, just getting your blood moving. That might be in the gym doing glute activation work, if that's something you want to work on. It might be getting onto a cardio machine for a little bit. It might be doing some arm circles, some hip rolls, some body weight squats, just something to wake the muscles up. If you're doing some heavier lifts in the gym, like doing a barbell exercise, like a bench press or a squat, then I find it really handy doing some warm-up sets before that. You will find that if you go straight into your working weight on those sorts of exercises, you think, oh my goodness, I don't think I can lift this. And then your second set feels fine. And actually, if you've warmed it up first with a light weight, then go into your working set, not only will you find it easier, but also I think you're less likely to get those tightnesses that can make you feel like you're getting that injury. So a warm-up sets on those exercises are great. but as can some body weight press ups before a bench and so on as well. And then the main chunk of the session itself is where those sets and those reps are going to come in. If you're a beginner, it might be that you're looking at 3 sets and then 8 to 12 reps to begin with. It doesn't need to be complicated. Sometimes you might have 6 exercises in a workout. Sometimes it might be more, sometimes it might be less, depending what time you've got. And then we have the cool down. And that really is just a few minutes to bring your heart rate down and notice how you feel. Now, your heart rate shouldn't be like super high after a strength session. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about stretching as well in a moment when we get into how you might feel after a session, because I think it connects nicely to that. But at the end of the session, you might have that few minutes to just cool down in some way and to switch off from the gym. But the whole workout doesn't need to be an hour. We've established that. It can be 10 minutes if that's all you've got, or it can be an hour if that's what you want as well. Now, the feeling you get after a strength session can be quite different. And I want to talk about this because I think if you're somebody who's used to doing cardio, then a strength session can really feel quite different, and it can be kind of confusing because after a run or a spin class or those more intense sessions like that, you really know that you've worked. You're sweaty, you're out of breath, your heart rate's really been up. And it feels very clear that something's happened. You've likely got those endorphins as well going through your system. You're feeling good. A strength session can feel different, especially at the beginning. You might finish and think, oh, I feel okay. I don't feel like I did anything. Your muscles might be aching a bit, but you're not sweaty. You're not really out of breath in the same way. And that can leave people thinking, did I do enough? And the answer, of course, is yes. But what's happening is different, but it is happening. So if you remember what I said earlier about those tiny tears in the muscle fibers and how that's happening in the recovery when they're building and repairing, that process has started, but you can't necessarily feel it in the same way yet, not in the obvious way that you feel with a cardio session. What you might feel instead is somewhere between the 24 and 48 hours is what we call DOMS. And DOMS stands for delayed onset muscle soreness. And that's the achy, stiff feeling in the muscles that you've been working. And you probably have experienced this where you go down to sit on the toilet after a really heavy session and you briefly reconsider all of your life choices. And that is actually when your body is in the middle of that repair process. And it's normal. And it's very common when you're just starting out or when you're changing your workout block and your muscles are doing something new. That doesn't mean it's what we aim for. DOMS absolutely isn't the goal. Having a session that makes you sorer doesn't mean it's a better session. And as a PT, I don't really want you to be feeling like that after every session, because that's going to minimize the movement that you do outside of the gym. You're going to feel like, I can hardly move, I can hardly get up. And even though I'll talk to you in a minute about what can help, we definitely don't want you feeling like this regularly. But I do think sometimes we can think that this can't be normal. It must be an injury when it's our first session. And then what happens is we don't go back to the gym because we're like, well, that felt really sore. So we leave it a few weeks, we go back, and then we get the same again. The thing that happens really is the soreness eases really quickly once your body has adjusted to what you're asking it to do. But you do need to give it a chance to adjust. So ease in at the beginning, go a bit lighter than you think you might need to at the start, and then keep consistently showing up, because each time you go in, you'll realize that actually the DOMS aren't as bad. It's just that first session. But if you do get DOMS, there are a few things you can do that will help. But there's also quite a few myths out there as well. So stretching is going to be one of the big ones that people reach for, but actually the evidence for post-exercise stretching, reducing DOMS or speeding up recovery is really quite weak, which I know can surprise quite a lot of people. But studies comparing stretching afterwards to just resting haven't found much meaningful difference. Now, that doesn't mean don't stretch. It means stretch for other reasons, because it feels good, because it can be beneficial at a different point than the session, but not because you're thinking that you're going to reduce those DOMS. But actually, a few minutes of gentle movement while your muscles are warm is a really nice way to finish a session anyway. Gentle movement is actually going to be the thing that really helps when you're sore. And I know it's likely not what you want to hear when you can barely walk down the stairs, but a light walk or some easy movement gets the blood flowing to those muscles, and that does help. Massage and foam rolling have also got a little bit more evidence behind them. So if you've got a foam roller at the gym, you could get on and use that. And then also A nice warm bath can also help. I actually do quite like an Epsom salt bath. But the thing that is going to make the biggest difference are those really boring, unglamorous ones. Getting enough protein to support your muscle repair, staying hydrated, getting a decent amount of sleep. And none of these are very exciting, are they? But they're the ones that really do hold up with the research. So if you can get around 20 to 30 grams of protein along with some carbs after training, and I don't mean like immediately after, I mean, if you're tying it in with your next meal, that's fine too. But aiming to get enough will help. But it does ease the DOMS. It typically peaks around 24 to 72 hours later and then gradually gets better. And the more consistently we train, the less that you're going to get it, because your body is then adapting. It's always that first session that is the hardest one. So how do we know that all that we're doing is actually working? And this is likely a question that I wish more people ask, because I think a lot of women are looking for evidence of progression in the wrong places. Now, the number on the scales is a bit of data that so many women use, but it isn't going to tell you whether you're getting stronger. And actually, if completely honest, in those early weeks when you're starting to train, if you've got really achy muscles, you might even see the scales going up a little bit or staying put, because our muscle will be holding on to more water as part of that repair process. Doesn't mean that you're not losing body fat. It doesn't mean that you're not changing body composition. But if you're only looking at the scales, then you might feel disheartened. And I think it's important that you know what is happening. And also in that first 1 to 2 weeks, it's going to be mostly about learning the movement patterns. Your brain and your body are still figuring out how to work together. So you might hear people talk about newbie gains, and there is actually something to be said for that, where quite quickly you start to get more efficient at the exercises and you feel stronger quickly. And then by weeks 3 to 4, most people really do start genuinely feeling it. By weeks 5 to 8, you might well notice that the improvements are noticeable. You're changing your body composition. But the measure that I love most is the everyday stuff. You're finding it easier to carry the shopping from the car. You're getting up off the floor without thinking about how you're going to do it. You're climbing the stairs without having to hang onto the banister, or you're feeling like you're not punting at the top. If you're going out for a walk or a run, you're finding the hills are easier. You're helping people in the garden or push a car out of a ditch. And you're like, actually, I could do that pretty easily now. That's it. That is the whole point of all of this. Strength isn't just about something you build in a session. It's about something that you then notice in your life in the moments when you didn't even have to think about it. It is also about that future health, but it's about how it makes us feel now. And the thing that I want you to remember with everything I've mentioned today is that if you are unsure of something, it is okay to ask for help, whether that's reaching out to your coach, asking for help, messaging me even, or speaking to a PT in the gym or somebody working the area and asking them how you use something. Normally people like sharing their knowledge, and it's nice if you can ask them if you're struggling too. But I do hope that we've covered some of the basics that maybe aren't covered that often, so that you can go away with a bit more clarity and know that it is okay to adapt and adjust. That yes, the optimal plan might look like 3 strength training sessions a week on set days every week, and that they last this number of time and they use this type of weights. But the most optimal thing is going to be the thing that you can do consistently over time, the thing that you can keep showing up for without feeling overwhelmed, without feeling like it's something that you have to do, the thing that you then can consistently do. So then you realize how good it feels, and then you just want to keep doing it. And that might well be starting with those PJ workouts, or it might well be doing timed workouts like one of my members did, where she didn't feel like counting reps anymore. So she chose one of the timed formats. But whatever it is, know that doing something is always better than doing nothing. And as always, I would absolutely love to hear from you. So please do leave a comment. Let me know if there's anything that you've learned from this episode or any myths out there that you have found crazy over time. And make sure that you do subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss the next episode. I will pop details for the podcast that I did on enjoying training a little bit more, which was episode 89. And I'll also pop a link to Ruth McFit, where you can find more information on joining us to help you with all of this and becoming one of the McFitties. And I will look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much. Goodbye.